Only a tiny scar remains. Ayla Kasarci was lucky. She was only grazed by a passing bullet. On the evening of July 15th last year, she was here next to the Bosporus Bridge in Istanbul.
Over there, near the crash barrier. That's where I was shot at.
Together with hundreds of other demonstrators, she blocked the way for soldiers attempting to launch a coup. Dozens were killed when the soldiers opened fire. Ayla was hit in the arm, her husband in the stomach.
On that evening, I and my husband rescued the future, not only of our own children, but of all the children in this country.
It gave Recep Tayyip Erdogan a weapon with which he could change the country unchecked and repress the opposition. The government is just as bad as the coup plotters.
Opposition lawmaker Aykut Erdogan is convinced the government allowed the coup to go ahead. He says the 240 people who were killed that night were sacrificed for a greater gain.
Yes, they knew the coup attempt would happen. They let it happen so that afterwards they could launch a counter-coup.
The Bosporus Bridge that links Europe and Asia was the scene of dramatic events on the night of Turkey's attempted coup. Since then, Ayla Kasarci has been celebrated as a July 15th veteran.
We knew they'd shoot at us, but I wasn't afraid. My only thought was, my children will still grow up if they have no father or mother, but they won't grow up if they have no fatherland.
The government was quick to blame the putsch on followers of Islamic cleric Fethullah Gülen. But doubts about the official version of events soon began to grow. On the night of the coup, the parliament in Ankara was bombed by fighter jets, while the delegates sat inside. Aykut Erdogan of the opposition CHP was also inside the parliament that night. The damage from the bombing has still not been repaired. Erdogan believes those who carried out the coup may simply have been used by the government.
I was on the parliamentary commission that was set up to investigate the coup. We applied in vain for the head of the army and the head of the intelligence services to be summoned. Both of them knew about the planned coup 8 to 9 hours before it happened. So how come the government knew nothing about it?
But asking such questions is dangerous. Numerous members of parliament are now sitting behind bars. Erdogan is a center-left politician who wants to keep Turkey as a secular republic. When he speaks of a counter-coup, he's referring to the state of emergency which the government put in place after the coup. Since then, huge numbers of people have been denied their basic rights. More than 140,000 suspected opponents of the government have been fired from the civil service over the past 12 months, and over 50,000 have been arrested. It's 6 a.m. at the bus station in Silivri, just outside Istanbul. Pensioner Abdullah Baştakeli has traveled all night to get here from Ankara. He's come to visit his son, who's being held at a high-security prison in Silivri. A prison bus takes Baştakeli and relatives of other prisoners on the last stage of their journey. They've come from all over Turkey. Their sons, daughters, and spouses have been jailed as enemies of the state. They're allowed to visit once a week for 40 minutes, separated by a glass screen. The prison at Silivri is now hopelessly overfilled. Nearly all the prisoners here are accused of treason. Journalists, academics, teachers, judges, lawyers, police officers, and soldiers. Baştakeli's son, whose name his father doesn't want publicized, was an officer in the army. His dad says he was at home the night of the coup. He's completely innocent, he says. Outside the prison, the group comes face to face with visitors calling for the death penalty for the relatives.
We're not criminals. We gave the authorities all the documents they wanted. Now 6 months have passed and they still can't tell us what my son is specifically accused of. All we can do is pray. There's nothing else we can do. We can't appeal to the government offices because they see us as traitors. What can we do? Nothing. There's no rule of law anymore.
In the capital Ankara, the seat of government and of the country's highest courts, the victims of the purges are just turned away. No one feels responsible for them. Abdullah Baştakeli has no other choice but to join the relatives of other political prisoners in turning to Turkey's largest opposition party, the CHP. The party has appointed an ombudsman to deal with all the complaints. But he can't do much more than listen to their desperate stories. Most of them have long given up hope of getting any kind of fair trial, where their relatives could prove their innocence.
First, our children were suspended. Then they were dismissed by decree. And after 20 years of being in the military, they were downgraded to the status of new recruits. Just imagine. My son lost all his rights. And then one Monday they came to our house and took him away and confiscated whatever they could find.
The cupboards are filled with information provided by those seeking help. The CHP appears overwhelmed and powerless to do anything.
We try to at least show a way forward for these people. Around 70,000 have contacted us so far by telephone, letter or email. Hearing about all these personal stories is quite upsetting.
It's unlikely he'll be able to do much for Baştakeli either. Turkey's opposition is fighting for its own survival. In May this year, the day came that Ayla Kasarci had been waiting for. The day the trial of the main suspects behind the military coup got underway. It was dubbed by Turkish media as the terror trial of the year.
It would be good if they would allow someone to throw stones at them until their blood flows. They should be tied together with a noose round their neck. That might help calm me down. I can still feel the rage inside me that I had on that night of the coup. I want them to reinstate the death penalty. But they shouldn't be killed by an executioner. They should let the relatives of the martyrs and veterans of July 15th do it instead. I would like that.
The enemies of the state should be shown no mercy. Kasarci agrees with the president. She admires Erdogan and finds criticism of the mass arrests unfair. For supporters of the government like Ayla Kasarci, everything in Turkey is now fine again, 1 year on from the coup. But the economy is stagnating. The tourists are staying away, and so are the investors. And Turkey's accession process for joining the European Union has come to a standstill. Ayla Kasarci goes down to the ferry to collect her husband. She's only recently been able to go back to work. She's still suffering from the injuries caused by last year's bullet wound. But the state looks after veterans like the Kasarcis. Ayla has found a new job at the Economics Ministry. During the fasting month of Ramadan, her street held a public gathering to break the fast at sundown. As July 15th veterans, the Kasarcis are almost like guests of honor. Everyone knows their story. Veterans like them have been celebrated over and over in the Turkish media, with detailed reports and interviews. Passers-by and neighbors tell us they admire the courage shown by the Khazarjis. They see them as heroes.
I always used to pray first for my family. Now I pray for my country and for our martyrs and veterans. May Allah hear my prayers. Yasin has brought the pride of the Turkish flag back to our street. I wish him a speedy recovery and success in his career. By thwarting this coup, we as a people have done a great thing. And those who weren't able to be there still show us their gratitude whenever they get the chance. And that makes me very proud.
The University of Kocaeli is a painful reminder for Derya Keskin of a life she once had. She taught sociology there for 6 years. Today, she's joining up with her former students and colleagues to attend the Solidarity Academy, an initiative which she set up herself. Keskin is one of thousands of university teachers and professors who lost their jobs last September, all because they signed a petition calling for an end to violence against Kurds in Turkey's southeast. The purges have affected not just active opponents of the government, but also people simply calling for peace and reconciliation and who happen to have a different opinion to the government. A holiday complex belonging to the Turkish trade unions on the Aegean coast is hosting the academy. The tutors will spend 5 days teaching here, partly helped by donations from abroad.
What we're doing here is a form of resistance, but it's also a sign of hope. Over the next few days, we'll be talking about how, in a country where our civil rights and liberties are being trampled on, we can regain these rights.
The first lesson is about how the concept of freedom has changed over the centuries. A subject that would probably no longer be taught at a Turkish university. The Solidarity Academy is keen to preserve a small amount of intellectual independence in a country where conformity is being enforced across the board, and not just since the attempted coup. The students know they're taking a risk just by being here.
I'm here because I was looking for a different learning environment. The universities have become passive. They have no purpose now. I can't see a future for myself in academia anymore. We're under a lot of pressure in the university, and of course we're afraid. That's our biggest problem. But as long as there are still things like this here, then I'm just going to try and learn as much as possible.
Derya Keskin could teach at one of the many private universities and colleges in Turkey, but they're too afraid to employ her. She doesn't even have health insurance anymore.
Turkey has signed the UN Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, but it's violating every single one of them. For example, the right to education and educational freedom. I want the students to publicize these violations. After all, they've experienced and observed them firsthand.
Because Mazlumber, an international human rights group, has been banned in the city of Diyarbakir under a court order, the entry sign has got to go. The ruling came as no surprise to Reha Ruhavioğlu, one of Mazlumber's long-standing executives.
We realize that the conditions in which we are working to improve human rights have got even worse in recent times. But we bear a responsibility to society, and we will try to continue to meet that responsibility. And you can't do that without taking risks.
Diyarbakir is the de facto capital of Turkey's Kurdish regions. It's also the heartland of the pro-Kurdish HDP party. The city's former mayor belongs to the HDP, but he was removed from office by Erdogan's government. Virtually the entire leadership of the party is in prison. Since the breakdown of the peace process between Kurds and the Turkish government, fighting has also resumed in Turkey's southeast. 2 years ago, the Kurdish terror group, the PKK, spent weeks fighting Turkish security forces in Diyarbakir's old city. Over 150 people were killed and thousands were forced to flee. Since then, the government has allowed the ancient district of Sur to simply slide. Ankara said the area would be rebuilt and made into an attractive place to live, but nothing has happened. The former residents believe it's an act of revenge. Femi Canbey is one of them. He wants to show Ruhavioğlu the place where his house once stood. It's a dangerous undertaking. The district has been totally sealed off by the police. The authorities don't want the extent of the destruction to be filmed.
Seeing all this makes me sad. I lived here for 23 years. I never imagined that something like this could happen to me. I was hemmed in for 55 days during the fighting. It was very traumatic. We just want peace and no more deaths.
When the fighting was going on, I tried in vain to mediate. I got in contact with the governor, the army, the political parties. But all sides were determined to go on with the war. There was nothing we could do.
This is one of the last intact streets in Sur. The people here fear they too will be driven out. Many fled here only a few years ago to escape the fighting between Kurds and Turks. They feel this kind of injustice is typical of what so many Kurds experience. Human rights activist Ruhavioğlu encourages them to stand up for their rights. They've received offers of compensation, but the amount is far too low. He urges them to reject the offers, but the residents say the pressure has become unbearable.
Our electricity has been switched off. Fortunately, some neighbors of ours from a few streets away have linked a cable to our house. So at least we can keep our fridge going so that our food doesn't go off. But that's the only electricity we have. We're sitting on packed suitcases, but we're refusing to sign the offer that the city authorities have made us. Now they've given us an ultimatum, we don't know what's going to happen.
This area was previously home to Armenians, until they were driven out and murdered over a century ago. Today it's the Kurds who see themselves as victims of the Turkish state. Ruhavioğlu says that since the attempted coup, government abuses in the southeast of the country have once again increased. He collects up reports from those affected and is trying to draw international attention to the plight of the Kurds.
The state of emergency and the decrees that followed the attempted coup have greatly restricted our work. All open-air rallies and protests are banned. That's a violation of our rights to the freedom of assembly. Also, cases of abuses in police custody have increased again. We thought we'd long since left those kind of problems behind us. We are also getting reports of shocking abuse and humiliation inside the prisons.
In the meantime, Ruhavioğlu has founded a new human rights organization called Initiative for Rights. How long this sign will stay up remains to be seen. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, time for the TV program Parametra on CNN Turk. Hande Firat presents the day's news and business stories. There is no mention of the destruction in Diyarbakir. If she were to report on it at all, she would focus on the aspect of the fight against terror, not on any human rights violations.
Güvenlik ve demokrasi arasında çok ince ve
There
zor.
is a fine line between security and democracy.
Sadece DAEŞ'la mücadele
Some
ediyor.
countries only have to fight the so-called Islamic State.
Mücadele ediyor.
Others have different terror groups.
DAEŞ'la mücadele
But Turkey
ediyor.
is fighting IS,
Aynı ülke
the
PKK
PKK,
ile mücadele ediyor.
and the terror group of Fethullah Gülen, which was responsible for the attempted coup.
Darbe kalkışması yaşıyor. Yani evet,
Yes, we have problems and disputes, but it's not true to say we're a divided society. I think that's too harsh. And incidentally, I don't think the European Union is doing enough to support us in the fight against the PKK.
Since the coup, Firat has become one of the best-known faces on Turkish television. On the night of the putsch, she interviewed President Erdogan on her mobile phone.
Alo.
Buyurun Sayın Cumhurbaşkanım, dinliyoruz biz sizi.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar efendim, buyurun.
He used the opportunity to call on the people to stand up against the rebel tanks.
Havalimanlarına davet ediyorum ve milletçe meydanlarda, havalimanında toplanalım.
Firat knows that 170 Turkish journalists are currently sitting in prison. She also knows that one newspaper article is enough to get you convicted of supporting terrorism. In her interview with us, she's careful not to be critical of the government.
Gazeteci olduğunuz için
Being a journalist does not permit you to commit crimes. But press freedom is important. We mustn't forget that.
özgürlüğü çok önemli.
After all, this country learned on the night of the coup how important it is to have many different media outlets and journalists who are able to report freely.
Sadece 15 Temmuz'da çok net öğrendi.
Firat still believes that Turkey is a good place to be a journalist, even though she doesn't feel completely safe.
Bir takım tehditler
After the
olduğu için
attempted
15
coup,
Temmuz'da,
I received a number of threats.
ben de dikkat
I was
etmeliyiz.
advised to be
Ben de
cautious,
dikkat
and I
ediyorum
took that
doğal olarak.
advice. Of course, I was worried at first. It's really quite a shock suddenly to get threats on your cell phone. But I've since learned to adapt to the new circumstances.
Sarsılıyorsunuz.
At the end of her working day, Firat gets escorted in her car by an unmarked police vehicle driving at high speed across Ankara. She's under government protection. So what really happened on the night of July 15th? It's a question that continues to bother Aykut Erdoğan. Almost every day he stumbles on some new detail that doesn't make sense or seems contradictory. Why, for example, was a bomb dropped on the garden of the parliament early on July 16th when the uprising had largely collapsed? Again and again, Erdoğan discusses with other lawmakers from his party about how they can shed more light on the events of that night. But they still need to be careful that they don't get accused of being involved in the coup themselves. Under the current state of emergency, their hope of ever finding out the truth is fading.
Those who were the architects of this crime or who have abused it for their own purposes must be called to account. But we weren't able to achieve that with our parliamentary probe. And now the judiciary is finished, I'm not expecting an independent legal process anymore.
Abdullah Baştakeli isn't expecting that for his son either, not since he read the indictment against him. He's horrified. He says his strictly secular family has never had anything to do with Islamist movements like the Gülen network, as the authorities now claim. What he also finds strange is that the allegations leveled against many others in prison are worded identically.
Look, there isn't a single accusation here against my son. One subject heading is enough and his name is just written underneath. There isn't a single concrete criminal charge here.
The families of those in prison don't just feel helpless, but also ostracized.
We had to move out of the army quarters. Many people we know are wondering about us now, even friends we've known for many years. They don't say it to our face, of course, but you feel it. Even our closest friends no longer call. They're afraid. They're probably worried about getting drawn into it too if they remain our friends.
bize de bir şey olur diye düşünüyorlar.
None of them have been able to find lawyers. Anyone they contact is either too afraid to take on the case or demands exorbitant rates.
Ben demiş hadi geleceklerse nereye gelecekler, ne yapayım? Ankara'ya gel.
We return to the banks of the Bosporus and the Kasarji family, the veterans of July 15th. They're finding it difficult to get back into normal life, especially Ayla's husband, Yasin. He used to love playing football. The bullet passed right through his stomach and only narrowly missed his spine. They find the very idea that the government might have allowed the coup to go ahead, taking such injuries and even deaths into account, is outrageous.
Our country is doing great, and we are being governed by a leader who is unparalleled anywhere in the world. But if he could have prevented this coup attempt, he would definitely have done so. But for some reason he couldn't. There must have been communication problems.
On that night, there was such a willingness to help and such a sense of solidarity across all boundaries. We no longer want to ask the question today whether the putsch could have been prevented.
The Kasarjis would go back out on the street again any time for Erdogan. With this president in office, they have no worries about the future of their children. Back on the Aegean coast, as the sun goes down, the university teachers who have lost their jobs are wondering what the future holds for democracy and education in their country, now that all forms of dissension are being suppressed. But also what their personal future holds. They can't even leave the country because their passports have been revoked.
We were dismissed because we are allegedly traitors. We've betrayed our country. You see how beautiful this country is and the sea here? And we're supposed to have betrayed this? I don't know to this day how anyone could do such a thing.
We have been banned from public service for life. We couldn't even patrol the gates at a university.
No one needs outward authorization to make their work legitimate. It doesn't matter if you're a writer or a plumber. I didn't become a teacher because someone told me to. For me, it's a calling, and so I'll continue to be a teacher even if the conditions get worse.
Here, there's still a faint hope that one day Turkey will be a society free of deep distrust, hatred, and fear. 1 year on from the failed putsch that has divided the country into two irreconcilable camps.